Okay, hello. Welcome to another episode of The House List. This is my weekly podcast. My name is Peter Agoston. I'm your host. Thank you for joining me again. Hope you all had a great Thanksgiving week. If you've been tuning in to The House List, I appreciate it. I hope that you enjoyed last week's double episode special for those traveling and all that during the Thanksgiving break. If you had one, or even if you didn't, you got 2 episodes. I'm going to try and do that again in December, so keep an eye out. I'm going to try, and share more episodes when I can. I'm producing these very much on the fly, if you haven't already noticed, which I think is somewhat evident. But that also adds to the great spirit of what I'm trying to do with this. It ain't produced. This is not in the studio. I'm not under some umbrella, being shielded. This is me. I'm out here, Anyway. Well, on today's show, I have a great guest, the tour manager, sound engineer, touring sound engineer, and my old fellow co-worker at the Knitting Factory when I worked there in Manhattan. Melanie Renecker is here, and we had a great conversation. I caught up with her while she was passing through New York on tour managing and doing sound for this singer-songwriter fellow by the name of David Ramirez. Some of you may be familiar with him. So she has been touring with bands, different kinds. I know she's, for those that are familiar with Deer Tick from Providence, Rhode Island, she's been their tour sound tech and tour manager a bunch over the years since they started getting their tours down. Those guys are cool. Hung out with those guys a few years ago, here and there. They're sort of Knitting Factory alum in a way as well. And we talk a lot about, Melanie and I, about our time working at the music venue. For those of you that may not be familiar with that club, now it's kind of a chain, a semi-chain in tertiary, secondary markets in America. They got one in Spokane, they got one in Boise. Those have been there for a while. Reno, but the club started in New York City a long time ago, and it's changed a couple. It's had 3 different locations. We worked at the second one, which closed in about the end of 2008. Technically, and I was a talent buyer there, and Melanie was one of the sound people there. Now, it was a club that had 3 floors, so there was a lot of staff, sound people, bouncers, bartenders, barbacks, night managers, and then me in the middle of all of that. So yeah, we talk about that, and then we just talk about her work as a tour manager and the stuff that she's done. She's super cool. She's definitely knows this job and is definitely an in-demand sound tech. Has worked in many clubs, big and small. So we kind of talk about that life, that aspect of the business too, which I think if you're a touring act, then you'll definitely understand. You may have even worked with her in any number of places. She lives in Austin now, but was living, of course, in New York when we first met. So I think it was a pretty cool one, especially as the first sort of touring person, the live touring industry kind of person that I've talked to on this. So hopefully this will lead to more. I know that world well, and I love those people that work in that that corner of the business of show, because they get it done. The people, whether it's the front of house people at the club or your touring sound person or the merch person or the tour manager, those are kind of essential characters and members of a team that help any number of musicians actually get their show down in a cohesive way and all that. So anyway, you get it. You get where I'm coming from. So you're going to listen to this chat. I want to actually just also thank Melanie for taking the time out, because they literally were on tour. She came over to the house before she had to load in. I think they were playing at the Mercury Lounge in Manhattan that night. And on this particular tour, she's like recording every show, and then they're like releasing it as an album or something like that each day. It's like a free, like the people that bought tickets for that show can like get a copy of that show later. So she was not only doing sound during the show, driving, tour managing from show to show, driving to each show, but also recording and basically engineering a live album on the fly every night. So if that gives you any kind of picture of how talented this person is, then you might get it. So sit back and enjoy my conversation with Melanie here on The House List with Peter Agoston. Start the conversation is just like, who are you in New York with right now?
Right now I'm with David Ramirez. He's a singer-songwriter out of Austin, Texas.
And you live in Austin now too, right?
Yeah, for the past 2 years.
And you moved there from New York?
I did.
And but you're not originally from New York, are you?
No. I grew up in Spokane, Washington.
Oh, cool.
And then lived in Seattle for 7 years before moving to
New York.
That's
right. Because wasn't it, you had Seattle in your email, didn't you?
It still is.
It is?
Yeah,
okay.
It's Seattle DIY, and then I have a New York number and a Texas license. So
hell yeah.
I'm all about confusing people.
So you went to Austin from touring, you settled there, like because of touring stuff, or how did you find yourself there? Because that's like obviously a hub for touring acts and stuff too.
Right. Well, the plan really was that I had a really good apartment, like cheap rent, everything. And I've always said that once I lost that apartment, then I would just move out of New York, because I can't afford to live here or pay $1,200 to basically have a storage space. So Austin was just kind of a natural choice. It's warm in the winter, which was definitely a positive. And
how long were you away from? Were you getting more and more away from your apartment in New York as you were because of work?
Yeah, I've been on tour consistently for 8 months out of each year since 2011 at least.
Right.
I've been touring since 2010.
Yeah. So the knitting, I obviously know you from the Knitting Factory, mm-hmm. and I want to talk about the Knitting Factory because I think that's obviously it plays into your job a lot.
Yeah.
And it's also pretty important for what I'm doing and what I've been doing, and I was one of two or three basically talent buyers that worked at the Knitting Factory in the last couple of years when it was, obviously many people probably know the venue, so I'm just prefacing this for whoever might be listening to. But now it resides in Brooklyn, but at the time when you and I both worked there, it was on Leonard Street in Lower Manhattan, below Canal Street, which I would guess would be kind of considered like the Tribeca? Yeah,
it was Tribeca.
Right. So, and I didn't necessarily want to dive right into the Knitting Factory, but I guess it's pretty relevant to what we're talking about too.
Yeah, definitely lots of material there.
Absolutely, yeah. So when it closed basically at the end of 2008, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
they still did some shows through 2009. Yeah.
Right. They did actually. Yeah. Come to think of it, I know that the big Black Friday fire, most of the people was set up some months before the turn of 2008 into 9.
Yeah.
If I'm remembering right, which I've told this story a lot to my friends and to different people about basically how that club closed. And like many clubs in New York, especially, there's a certain turnover, over a period of time. Clubs come and go. Like, and New York has a very storied history of that. But I see, having like continued working in music stuff as like an agent, and I even went into tour management like right after that. How much, because it was a big, it was a pretty big staff of people.
Yeah.
It was 3 floors that was booked almost every night of the week. And how they all splintered out into different jobs in the music industry. So I guess just for the sake of context here too, like when did you start working at the Knitting Factory?
Let's see. I moved to New York from Seattle in 2004. Yeah. So basically, once I moved here, I knew I had one friend that lived in New York, and a friend of hers, Adam Fisher, was an engineer at the Knit and got me a job in the basement venue at the old office.
Yeah, it was called the basement. The bottom floor of the club was the old office, because at one point in time it was just a 2-floor club, and that was the office. I'm not mistaken, right? That was a little bit before my time.
Right. How I understand it was there was the main space on the ground floor, one would say, and then the floor below the ground floor was divided in 2 before my time. Half of it was like the tap bar, and half of it was something else.
Right.
I forget what that was called. Maybe it was just the office or something. And then the basement was an office and like recording studio. But whenever I started working there in 2004, the basement had been turned into another bar.
Right. Okay. So you got that job basically sight unseen, and you hadn't they were like, hey, we're hiring someone
straight out of school. I don't even think they were necessarily hiring anybody. It was just the way people got jobs at the Knitting Factory is by knowing other people.
Right. That's how I got my job.
Yeah.
It was it was through Michelle Cable, who runs Panache, a booking agency, Panache, which is where I went to work after the Knitting Factory closed. But I'd been writing for that when it was a fanzine. It was like a punk rock newsprint zine. She hooked me up with Chantel and then Shay, and then I ended up getting that job.
Right.
But so you must have had experience working in clubs before that, doing sound before that.
Not really. I went to school in Seattle at the Art Institute of Seattle for audio production, and my passion was in recording, in being in a recording studio environment. And I moved to New York just for more opportunities because Seattle was pretty saturated and kind of closed off to fresh meat. So
as far as being a studio engineer.
And so I moved to New York. I got some internships. I worked at a jingle house. I ended up getting a studio management position at the Magic Shop, which
what is that?
It was like a Grammy Award-winning recording studio in Soho that just recently closed, I think maybe this year. And then I was also working at the Knitting Factory.
So doing both.
Yeah, and so...
Because that was just an internship too, right? When you were working at the studios?
Most of those were internships. The studio management position was an actual position. And then I was working actually at a lot of different clubs. The Knitting Factory was just sort of like a stepping stone. I also worked at Club Midway, which was in the Lower East Side. I did stuff at Union Hall, and for a brief time I worked at Webster Hall. This was like before Music Hall of Williamsburg.
Of course.
And...
Yeah, because the New York clubs...
Europa.
Right.
A ton of
because in like looking back too, because I moved to New York in 2005, so the venue, obviously the the kind of structure of venues in New York for live music in 2004 and 5 is, very, very different than how it is now.
Mm-hmm.
And it was there were fewer and far between in a way, I guess, right? So were you just picking up gig, like did one club lead to another just from meeting other people that were doing sound at these clubs too, or how did that even come together?
Definitely. I mean, the Knitting Factory really was just sort of the stepping stone into everything else, because a lot of those engineers worked at other clubs, so sometimes they would ask me to fill in, or they would just point me in the direction of a production manager that they knew at a certain place. Also, regulars at the Knitting Factory would hook me up. And the Magic Shop recording studio also owned the living room,
right.
which was like a singer-songwriter, like haven,
right.
also in the Lower East Side. So I worked there as well.
So you already knew your way around a board, like before getting into a club. Now, I mean, as I say that, I'm even, the console in like a studio engine, like in an actual like recording studio, is completely different than like the board at, like in the old office and stuff. So how did you pick that up? How did you learn that just like in a rudimentary way?
Right. Actually, going back to Seattle, I did have to have like an internship in order to fulfill graduation requirements. And a friend of mine was a booking agent at, what was it? Oh, it's called Graceland before she purchased it, and it was then El Corazon. And
oh yeah, which is still a club in Seattle.
It's still a club.
Right.
She no longer owns it, but. So I worked at that club, and at the time they had just like a front of house console, and they also had a monitor board, but the front of house engineer would have to run to the stage and like do monitors.
Really?
Yeah, because they never hired a monitor engineer.
How big was that room?
I would say it was probably like 400 cap, something like that.
So I mean, so you still, like, if it was a sold out show or like a big show, you would have to like muscle your way through the crowd to get to the monitors?
I mean, I was still at school, and I had absolutely no idea what I was doing, especially in a live setting. So, honestly, the engineer there, he just plopped me in front of the console and was like, "Okay, if anything feeds back, you touch these." He was indicating the graphs, instead of like the actual board itself, and he basically got everything set up.
What do you mean by graphs?
They're just EQs for each monitor.
Like those are presets or no?
No, it's a piece of outboard gear that has all of the frequencies from 20 hertz.
See, I've never done
20K.
monitors before, so I mean, you got like I've done a lot of shows before, but
it's just one of the tools that we have to battle feedback and
right.
to also, every speaker is different, every monitor is different, every room is different. So you need some of these tools just to, make things sound natural, as well as manage things like feedback in a live setting.
Right. So then you came to New York with you had like a baseline of experience in the club. How long were you working at El Corazon in Seattle for?
At the time it was Graceland.
Oh, right.
It was just for a few months.
Okay,
it was
so yeah.
my graduating year in 2004, and so I don't know, maybe once a week or something like that, I would come in and just hold down the fort.
Wow, yeah.
But getting back to your original question, the thing that I enjoy about live sound, versus working at a studio fresh out of school, is that when you go into a studio fresh out of school, they're not going to give you a lot of duties, and even if you land like an assistant engineer role, you're still sitting on your hands until someone tells you to do something.
Right.
So a lot of honing in your skills gets lost in that downtime. And the thing that I appreciate with live sound is you just get immersed in it, and you immediately are touching knobs, you're touching faders, you are troubleshooting, and it's so much more exciting.
Right, and especially I feel like if I remember too, at the knitting factory, where it would be like, since there was three rooms, each of like going from smaller to larger, each, as the sound person became more adept and confident, and was also getting, other jobs too. They weren't trying to stick around in the 100 cap old office for very long. Like, so whoever was coming in under them would, they would definitely be getting work, because no one would,
Oh, yeah.
no one wanted to work in that room I mean, maybe they did, but it wasn't the same as doing a big show in the main space, obviously.
Yeah, I think I took my time there, because I like to think that I kind of owned that room for a while.
Oh yeah, really?
And yeah, so my first show, my first day ever on the job, was a hardcore show in the old office.
Nice.
And the soundboard was like right next to right in front of the stage, right in front of the PA was on sticks.
Right.
And so I spent that show just standing on a chair, bracing half of the PA with one hand and sticking my elbow out and kind of kicking kids, the other.
So
at one point, I got roundhouse, and whenever I was back by the bar, just kind of checking out the sound, and also I was kind of getting fed up with being pushed over and stuff. Some kid roundhouse kicked me in the bridge of my nose. And then there were 2 shows that night. The second night was just a normal rock show.
Right. So it was an early and late show, right?
So it was an early and late show. And the normal just random, just whatever bar band that was playing. The late show, one of the fans got offended that another fan was holding another man's hand.
Wow. Okay.
So he started a fight, and then we were all trying to break the fight up, and then this guy clocked me in the bridge of my nose.
Oh my
again.
God.
I was okay, welcome to New York.
Yeah. 2 shows in a row.
2 shows in a row, and my nose still isn't broken.
That definitely sounds like a very Knitting Factory style scenario too.
Oh yeah.
There was a lot of unpredictable shit that happened in that club too, and
there were many riots. There was so much stuff that happened.
Yeah, and there was such a clash of genres too, where it would be there would be 2 totally different shows, early and late, and the crowd may still be interspersed with one another, whether they want to be or not. I remember I did Merle Allen and the Murder Junkies in the old office, and the drummer, who I think was in the original Murder Junkies when it was Gigi Allen,
right?
Who I think had a green afro, or it was a wig or something. He didn't have. I think he was either naked, or he was at least just had underwear on or something. But near the end of the set, he totally stuck the drumstick super far up his ass during the show. And this Merle Allen too, who has a pretty imposing figure. He's got these long ass black dreadlocks and a crazy facial hair. But anyway, that was in the same room that you got roundhoused.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, the old office too it was so far underground too. It was 2 sub levels underground. It's basically being in the subway almost.
Definitely.
So then, how did that, how did you, because, when I came in too, you were already you were one of a couple of people sort of as the main sound people, if I'm remembering correct at least. What was that experience just building up to that?
I probably spent 1.5 years or 2 years in the old office before I felt confident enough to do a tap bar, just because I was still honing in my skills as far as an audio engineer, and didn't want to fuck up a show basically. So once I felt comfortable with that, then I moved up to the tap bar, and that was, I think I loved working in the tap bar. The main space, let me see, I want to say that they didn't have a monitor console for much of my time there, and then eventually they did put in a monitor console, and that's whenever I started working in the main space.
Right.
And I don't remember the timeline
Sure.
when that came into play. But so then that kind of pushed me into also the main space rotation of front of house or monitors,
Right.
or anything like that.
Is that the
And
first time you
also-
did monitors?
Yeah, that was the first time that I had experience doing monitors at a venue. And then there were also certain engineers wouldn't do certain shows. And
Yeah.
I just wanted to do like whatever, like,
Right.
and so
It's all coming back to me now.
so, I would just take whatever work was available.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
most of my time at the New York knitting factory days, I was working 7 days a week, and then also working a day job at least 5 days a week.
Were you still doing studio stuff then too, or?
For most of that, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I quit studio stuff once the Brooklyn thing opened, because I took over as production manager and head engineer at the Brooklyn location.
Who was the well, not the production manager, but who was the main sound guy at the knitting factory on Leonard Street that we worked at? What was his name?
Jason.
Yeah. Because, and then, do you remember everyone else that worked there too? All the other sound people?
Most, yeah.
Because it seemed like there was like at least 10 or more.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was a ton of people. Like, I definitely remember that because, I did a lot of hip hop shows there. And there was some, and they were all very, hip hop is such a broad term too.
Mm-hmm.
And there was, a broad range of performers in the crowd. But I definitely remember it sort of divided some of the sound people up a little bit who would take those shows. But I know like when fucking Subhumans or like some like really like tough hardcore shows, or like the hardcore matinees that went like, did you do any of those matinees? The all day hardcore matinees?
Oh yeah, definitely. We did those. I remember doing 24 bands in 12 hours. That's kind of the
Right.
joke that we called it. That was sort of like a battle of the bands. And oftentimes,
Yes.
we were working, like the battle of the bands thing would happen on a Sunday. I was working a Saturday night. Saturday night would wrap up at like 2. We might do a little after hours partying, and then just sleep at the venue because,
Right.
we had to be at the venue by like, 8 or 9 in the morning, and nobody's going to try to hail a cab back to Brooklyn just to come back, So there was definitely a lot of sleeping at the venue.
I never.
Overnights.
Right. So where would that? It just in the back. There's like one couch in the backstage. You sleep on the stage. Just wherever.
Wherever, green rooms.
Right.
If there were a lot of people, then sometimes we would just take folding chairs and make little beds.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So there'd be like, if it was a big, like all day matinee thing that went into a night show, then there would be a lot of staff for it. If it was the all club thing, right?
Yeah.
How many people? What's the most people that spent the night at the club that went from one night to the next morning? Do you remember?
Oh, I have shit memory. I don't
Right.
know.
Yeah, I stayed late, but I never woke up. I never spent the night in the club. But
Yeah. For the most part, it would just be like, if a bartender was scheduled, maybe it would be like a bartender, maybe it would be a bar back, and then the sound staff for, each room.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Wow.
Maybe security. I don't know. Like.
Wow. Yeah. So that's a long party. And then, did you do 3 Floors of Ska?
Oh, I did lots of 3 Floors of Ska.
Which 3 Floors of Ska was like a pretty well-known event too, I think, which is Shay, who was the GM. I don't know.
He was the GM.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Who gave me my job, who I love very much, and I think is a great guy. I haven't seen him in a long time, but nevertheless, like he was a great GM, fun GM to work with, if memory serves me correctly. But he did. He was like came from the ska world and was like the Scatolites like tour manager, I think, if I remember correctly. But he did this event that was called 3 Floors of Ska. It was probably no different, besides the genre of music than like an all day like Battle of the Bands or hardcore fest where it was like when you have 3 rooms, it's basically 3 different venues all shoved into the same space. That also just had one doorway to load in and out of.
Yeah.
So can you talk about that for a second?
There was also the 3 floors of goth.
Oh shit! Yeah.
Yeah. There was goth nights. So I mean, most bands that play, doing any show in Manhattan is a pain. Just because parking is an issue, loading in is an issue, and the fact that you had to load stuff down like basically 3 flights of stairs really was a pain for a lot of bands, and we didn't have loaders. Everyone had to do it themselves.
Yes.
So the most complaints obviously came from the kids that were playing in the basement, especially. A lot of those shows were the hardcore shows, so everybody's got like big Marshall cabs and like half stacks or trying to put full stacks down there, like 8x10 like bass cabinets,
just going down all 3 floors, stuff. Right?
Yeah, in a very narrow stairwell, and if you're doing it before the doors open or before any of the other rooms in the club are open, then it's much easier. But trying to get your gear out whenever, you've got patrons, you've got bar backs, you've got, security running up and down the stairs. It's very chaotic.
Yeah, I can remember definitely seeing bands attempting to like load out like in the middle of a show, and there's just like drunk people going up and down. It's just all one stairway, one entranceway. Yeah. Which is pretty, in a way, it's like pretty awesome because when you go to any other, mostly any other venue, there's like separate entrances, there's alleys and different doorways, and there's just one way in and out, and it's amazing there was not that anything too terrible happen. Although someone definitely died at one of my shows, so I will.
I remember people dying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyone like the person that died at my show was in the bathroom, so I remember
that's probably the same one. Then.
Yeah, he overdosed in the bathroom, but I remember we had to hold doors because I had a hip hop show. I'm not going to say what hip hop show it was, but I had a hip hop show in the main space, and it was over, and but some unfortunate soul was had passed out in the bathroom and was unable to awaken. I mean, I guess I don't know if that's like the right way of putting it, but you know what I mean. So, but it was like late at night, and we had to hold the doors and keep people in the room while the paramedics and like the ambulance and the police and like everyone came, and we had to go because the bathroom's downstairs too. Yeah. Had to go down there and bring this poor fella up while like a lot of anxious people from a hip hop show are like ready to leave. So yeah, that shit was crazy. Yeah. Knitting Factory was like, that's like, and I know there's a lot of other venue institutions like First Ave, I think the 930 Club, and like emos, and there's a ton, many more, but like those ones. Like the Empty Bottle, but again, I don't want to like just regale like a million venues at you, but I feel if you worked like at that club like in the last like 5 years, I'm talking about the Knitting Factory, as it closed, it's just like you like totally like earn your stripes in a place like that, because it's a lot of very different personalities and a lot of different kinds of musicians and a lot of different. New York was at a certain place too, where Brooklyn didn't exist in the way it did as like a musical destination, or it was just starting. And I interviewed Todd P too for this as well, which was kind of like of that near that time too. So
yeah.
Anyway,
the Knitting Factory definitely taught me how to be a New Yorker.
Yeah. Do you still work with any? Do you work with any of the sound people from that time? Have you guys? I mean, knowing that you went to the other Knitting Factory, but are there? But after, actually, we should backtrack a little bit. So you went to the other Knitting Factory, and then how long did you stay there, or what was your job there?
So 2009 was the opening of, I believe, Brooklyn Bowl, as well as the Knitting Factory in Brooklyn. And maybe Brooklyn Bowl opened late 2008. I forget exactly their timeline, but I was working for them as well. And then I shifted my focus to the Brooklyn Knitting Factory just because I had more responsibilities, and I was there like 7 days a week.
You were hiring and assigning
staff,
people, right?
And I was doing all of the production management, all the advancing shows. That's sort of how I learned what tour managers ask for and such. That kind of became my baby. But I was really, I don't know, probably for 2 years prior, I've been actively trying to tour. And I'd been meeting with lots of managers and submitting my resume and everything with no success because I hadn't cut my teeth on the road yet.
Right.
So nobody was really willing to give me that shot. So I told the people that hired me for the production management and chief engineer role that I did want to tour, and everything was cool with that. And then I started touring in 2010, and there just became a point where it became obvious that I was on tour so much that it was harder to be like a manager of anything.
Right.
And so I think I quit in like maybe 2011.
Right. Would you say
just to
that
focus on touring?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of would you say that's like the natural trajectory for a sound engineer that's also known as a front of house? I mean, your average listener might not know that too, but where they would go from a club, they would want to evolve from a club sound person to going on the road and picking up those jobs. I've known a lot of those people too. I mean, that's kind of a fair assessment, right? Like,
I would say for a young and eager engineer, that is the trajectory. And then, once you're a little bit older, maybe you've toured for many, many, many years, maybe you've settled down, you have a family now, or maybe you're just tired of the road, maybe you just want to sleep in your own bed.
And that eventually does happen.
Yeah,
right?
Eventually. And then that's whenever you get like the older engineers who work at a venue who just, they want to be home.
Right.
So it's kind of comes full circle.
What was your first tour? When your first time going out?
First time was with a band called Deer Tick.
Right. Who Deer Tick too was kind of a part of that Knitting Factory family,
Yeah, I would say there was a little nepotism in my getting that position, just because their label was affiliated with the Knitting Factory.
Right. But they played a lot there in their early years when, John Chavez, is still their booking agent, but also was like, I think they were kind of like found there in a way, or at least they were in the early incarnation of them was nurtured in that original room. I remember them playing on New Year's Eve with like Deerhoof and someone, but anyway,
all the Deer bands.
Right. So okay, yeah. So and then you've actually done more than just that. I mean, you've done a lot of tours with them, right?
Yeah. So I would say that Deer Tick was sort of the stepping stone into touring with other bands, because I did a lot of their other projects. So I toured with Deer Tick as their front of house engineer for about 3 years.
That was to start. That's what you did.
Very beginning,
right?
My very first tours ever, and then I also did their Middle Brother tour. I also worked with Diamond Rugs, which was another offshoot of them.
Right. Which is a totally different makeup of a band, too.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. These are all different bands, but just comprised of other members of Deer Tick. And then also, so I also worked with Delta Spirit, and I worked with Delta Spirit because of Matt Vasquez, who was also in Middle Brother. And so it's just kind of like a little family tree. You know, you start with one band, and then you know, maybe you work with some of the people that open for them. Maybe you work with some people from a side project, and then it just kind of, you know, goes here and there.
Right.
And then other work just kind of came to me naturally from, you know, some other touring friends who couldn't do a tour.
Sure.
And then just passed it on to me. And then,
Yeah.
kind of goes on from there. And I have like about 2 or 3 managers that always throw work my way.
Right, yeah. And I feel like the few other sort of front of house tour manager people that I know, it's kind of, there is like a small family of that specific kind of person that has that work, that goes from, that has their regular bands, and then on their various off, you know, cycles or whatever, then they pick up work either through the management or the label, or it's inadvertently doing sound for the opening band that they bring along or something like that. So yeah, beyond that, like nucleus of bands, you've are working with someone on this trip too, but this is just like right now here in New York, it's just a fly-in, right? Like, or you're actually driving.
Yeah, we're on a full tour.
Oh, my bad.
So yeah, this is it's about maybe a 2-month tour, something like that.
So where are you at
really
right now?
We're in our second week, and this is like the bootleg tour. So normally David Ramirez tours with a band, but he's trying to get some funding for his next record. So he's just kind of make it low key. And so we're recording. I'm recording every show.
Are you?
And uploading it to a Dropbox, and then all the ticket buyers get a link to that Dropbox, and
to that each show.
Just to the show that they went to, that they bought tickets for. But it's encouraged. I think it's encouraged at least that that other cities can like interchange their.
Cool. They can kind of trade their bootlegs, sort of, right? Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. How quickly do you have to put that show up? Is it like the next day?
I try to do it within 48 hours.
Whoa.
Mainly,
and you're doing that too?
I'm doing that, yeah.
So
and
that's, okay.
Mainly that's just because I just don't want a huge workload at the end of this tour. And then also we're relying on promoters to get, to email these links out to the ticket buyers, and I just don't want that to
right,
be forgotten.
Yeah, it will get forgotten pretty quickly after a show's over.
Everybody's really busy, yeah.
Right. How are you recording? And do you have are you miking up because he's just solo on this, right?
He's solo, yeah.
Okay.
So it's 4 inputs total. It's 2 audience mics, his vocal and his acoustic guitar.
Oh, cool.
And I'm running that through the console and taking the outputs from the console into, I've got a Zoom recorder as a backup, and then I also have this little Focusrite interface preamp thing that I'm running Logic.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Crazy. So are you mixing it on the fly, or is it as if you're just simultaneously doing the sound on the main board, but you're also are they identical? I mean, excuse my ignorance.
No, I know. I'm just trying to think of a way to explain it without getting too technical.
No, please, I mean, feel free to get technical. Okay. I want to learn, and I think the people that listen to this is like a broad mix of people. So right. I'm interested because I mean, I just simply don't know. But I figured I would assume it would be 2 different things. I don't know how you would merge the 2 seamlessly and turn it around as quickly as making it available like the next day or 2.
So there are multiple ways that you can do this, and I'm not multi-tracking. It's just a left and a right. So it just kind of depends on what console you have. Sometimes you have a digital console. Sometimes you have like an old analog board.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And so each room I just have to assess what is going to produce the best mix. So let's say we have a matrix out, which is just...
What's that mean?
I know.
You have to answer these, though.
So it's just like an output. It's basically just we'll just call it like a parallel output, right?
That didn't make it much easier. What's a parallel output?
So you have your main outputs, right? To go to the PA. You have your left and your right. Sometimes.
That would be typically in DI boxes, right? Or does it matter?
They would go. The left-right outputs from the console would go into your processing, which would go into your PA.
Gotcha.
You generally don't touch that stuff, right? But you have other outputs. So some outputs you can assign to auxiliary sends, and auxiliary sends are what you use primarily to send effects to. So you get reverb on a vocal, or monitor sends, right? So each channel that an artist wants to hear, then you would use that auxiliary send to send them their level. So then moving down the console, you might have like group outs, which just means that each channel you can assign to a group, right?
Okay.
So that a group, you could just have one or two outputs, right? However many outputs that you have, go to, and you can assign those to, your recording unit or so. A matrix is kind of like one of those group outs. Basically, with a matrix, you can send the left-right, so you don't have to like create the mix. It's already there. It's just through the left-right. So whatever's going through your left-right into the PA is what you're getting into your, like in my case, my Zoom recorder,
right?
As my backup.
And for the sake of like a bootleg live show, it's not like it doesn't have to be meticulously mixed, especially with one. It's basically one channel, right? Maybe that's not the right way of putting it.
Two channels,
right?
So
for vocals and the guitar, is that what you mean?
And then audience mics, right?
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So because I have audience mics, I kind of have to build a mix. So if I have groups, then I'll just assign things to the group, and sometimes I just have to use those aux sends that I was talking about to build a mix for like my Logic file.
So when they asked you to do this, were you like, I don't know how to do that? Like, do you? Have you recorded? You had done bands in the studio, right? Were you applying that?
Yeah, I've come from a recording background, so
right. Even at the Knitting Factory too. Now that I say that too, because all this is like coming back to me, is like, you've probably recorded plenty of bands just taking a line out of the board, right?
Sometimes people would bring their little portable recorders in and be like, hey, can we just get a left-right out and record the show for us? Just hit these two buttons here, and there we go. So it wasn't anything new. And then I also, whenever I'm on tour, especially with a band I've never worked with, I usually have my Zoom recorder, and I'll record the first couple of shows, and if the artist asks, or sometimes I just play it for them, just to make sure that everything's cool. And
oh, cool. Yeah,
are you the way they want?
So who else have you worked with in the last, in this past year? Have you been going from one to one, like back to back? Yeah.
So a couple artists that I work with regularly. Noah Gunderson, he's a singer-songwriter out of Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
And then this year, primarily, I've been doing monitors, stage management, and I've been a backline tech for Postmodern Jukebox.
What's that?
Postmodern Jukebox is like a YouTube band. They take pop songs and rearrange them as like jazz or big band numbers.
What kind of rooms are they playing in?
They're playing theaters.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So what is that like? How many people are on stage for that?
Oh,
it sounds like a big ass
11,
band. Right.
I think 11.
So, and you're doing front of house?
No, I'm doing monitors.
Okay. So that's like, you must be, what was that, 2 buses or something? Or like, how are you going from show to show there?
No, that was just a bus.
Okay.
Yeah. Earlier this year, we did 3.5 months in Europe, and those buses are a little bit bigger. And then I guess the end of summer, we were just in Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, and Malaysia.
Oh, wow. So was that a first for you?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, that was.
What was your first European run? Like, who was that with?
Deer Tick, actually.
Right. A while ago?
Yeah, that was a long time ago.
So what, do you see any difference at all? Like, from room to room, or the boards that are being used? Like, what's the contrast really from your perspective, touring as a front of house? I'm assuming are you tour managing too? I mean, when you're overseas,
Most times.
you are?
Yeah.
So you're tour managing overseas too. So you're settling? Right.
Yeah.
Crazy.
I
So
settle and
yeah. So just really quickly, how do you see much of a difference outside of the obvious? Like sometimes there's some communication language barrier or something like that, but there's probably not even that in the rooms, and
Yeah, I mean, European. I think the main difference is Europeans tend to take care of their bands better. Like hospitality generally, and it ranges from country to country, but
right.
For the most part, like hospitality is on point, and like people are very prideful of their countries and their cities, and they want to treat the bands and show the band like, hey, this is us.
Right. It's not just a case of water and a case of PBR.
Yeah, it's not the bare minimum.
Right.
It's not a couple of drink tickets.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, there are obviously like other differences. Like in Europe, you tend to play, at least on a smaller scale, you tend to play weirder venues.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're playing a castle. Maybe you're playing a just a regular club.
What's like the strangest place in Europe that you can remember doing sound in?
Probably a castle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
Milan,
sound must be pretty.
Well, it was sort of like in the courtyard. It was with Jonas Policewoman, and she opened up for Lyle Lovett.
Oh wow!
And it was like half of this residence in Milan was not really occupied, and it was kind of like falling apart and stuff. And like the other half were like the groundskeepers, kind of like lived there.
Weird.
Yeah, it was.
But I mean, Lyle Lovett, that's a big show. I mean, that must have been.
It was probably 1,200.
Oh, interesting.
So. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, it was pretty fun.
So when did...
I'm sure there were weirder spots, but that's what comes to
mind. I think that just even imagining it is really neat. So I did want to go kind of backtrack just a little bit, because when you started, you weren't doing tour management stuff too. And I think your average listener too might not really even know, one, what a tour manager is, even less so what like front of house is. And basically just to really quickly like kind of alliterate what those two things are in your words,
Sure.
And then I'd love to talk about how you because you do both. And so just to explain, like in the most elementary term possible, like, so what is front of house?
Sure. So how I would describe it to my parents.
Yeah, there you go.
is front of house is what I do is I mix the sound that the audience hears. If I were to explain what a monitor engineer is, then I would be mixing what the band hears on stage. And that's the rudimentary.
That's perfect.
Elements of what a front of house engineer and what a monitor engineer is. What a tour manager is basically a road parent.
Yeah, it's a little more nebulous.
Yes. There are a lot of duties as a tour manager. And most of that work is, it depends tour to tour, because each band does things just slightly differently. So those things get worked out. But essentially, what I do is I book hotels for my bands. I route our schedule, like how long it's going to take from city to city.
Mm-hmm. This is all before the tour starts.
This is all before the tour starts. I advance the shows, and by advancing I mean I get in contact. I have a contract, and on that contract is the promoter's email address and phone number. I get in contact with the promoter, and we go over the terms of the contract, and I let them know what we need and what our timeline is, and I confirm all of the details so that whenever we arrive, everybody's on the same page.
Right.
And then...
which is essential,
Yeah. And so then, you also have to deal with, like, merch, and you have to deal with settlement. You have to make sure that hospitality is there for your bands. And once you arrive to the venue, you're basically doing everything over again and making sure that all the terms of the contract are met and that your band is happy, and that's priority number one.
Right. So when you were at the Brooklyn Knitting Factory, I mean, you obviously dealt with the other side of that a lot, advancing the shows with tour managers.
Exactly.
So at what point in time, what was your first time tour managing a band? Because it's just a totally different experience than doing sound. I mean, you're kind of focused on one duty, which is, also obviously crucial when you're doing the sound, but it's so much broader as a tour manager.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you transpire into that?
Sure. I think the first time I tour managed was with Deer Tick. I think it was just like their regular tour manager couldn't do the dates, and it was a very short run, maybe.
Oh, okay.
I don't even know the timeline of it. But it was like maybe just like a week. Oh, maybe it was around, I don't know. It could have been around like Newport Folk Fest or something like that.
Right.
But
so you had already like been on tour,
Yeah, I had been on tours
before.
And I'd been observing,
Sure.
what the tour managers did and had to deal with, and thinking to myself, I don't ever want to have to tour manage because it's a lot of work.
Rough. Yeah.
And when things go smoothly, it's great, and when things go wrong, it is a total nightmare. And yeah, I think just out of necessity, and also I'm kind of just game for anything. I just, when Deer Tick wasn't touring, whoever else hired me after that, I would just, it was probably whenever I really started tour managing and
Right.
and cutting my teeth on that. And
How do you like doing that?
initially I didn't think that it was possible for you to be a tour manager and an audio engineer and do both effectively or well. And then I just sort of strove to try to accomplish that.
Oh yeah.
And so no one thing takes priority over another. Obviously, I have to prioritize, things that have to happen.
Well, when you're doing both, you're unavailable during the time that they're performing. So if anything happens, you got to be like sort of have like that in mind, because you can't just run away from the board too to like tend to some other shit. So
yeah. I mean, during a show, if I'm mixing a show and somebody's texting me, "Hey, I can't get in," I was supposed to be on the list. It's like, sorry, dude. Like, I wish you would have gotten here at doors.
Yeah. Yep.
Something like that.
Sure.
Obviously. But, I mean, there are times that you can step away from the board, but yeah, it's all about prioritizing, and this industry is all about doing things on the fly.
Yeah, no question. I mean, even just us linking up for this interview, just because you happened to be here, I remember I was like, oh shit, she's in town tomorrow. So you're tour managing this tour with this guy too, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, with a single person on stage, I mean that's pretty chill, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is it just in a van?
Yeah, it's 2 people in a 15-passenger van.
It's just the 2 of you.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. That's. Is there? And I mean,
luxurious.
there's not a lot of gear either.
No.
So
mostly merch.
Right. So where did it start?
We started. We left Austin a couple weeks ago, and the first date of the tour was Tulsa.
Oh, cool. What is that? Canes?
Where were we? No, we weren't.
It's not like that, right?
Kings. No, this is a pretty.
Have you ever done that room?
Yeah.
I've never been there, but I'm fascinated with that club.
Gymnasium in there.
Is it? So it's not really the best sounding place in the world?
It's not the best sounding place.
Cool.
I mean, it's got great history, and it's,
right.
it's, definitely has a vibe, but it's not the best sounding place.
Right.
I have
so do you end it?
Short-term memory, I don't remember.
Do you finish in Austin too?
We actually finished this leg in Albuquerque. Yeah, and then we do a bunch of dates, a bunch of Texas dates in December. So now
is the work primarily you're doing when you're going out? Is it always both now, where you're doing front of house and tour managing, or is it still a mix for you, or how does it work now that you've been doing it for a few years? More than a few years, really.
I would say that, Deer Take is probably the last band that I've ever only done front of house for.
Okay.
And not had a double duty. Every other tour I've ever been on has been double duty of some sort. Even with Postmodern Jukebox, I was monitor, engineer, stage manager. So while I didn't have to be a tour manager, which was awesome, I still wore a bunch of other hats.
Right. Wow. So that's just the job itself. It's like, I guess you could call it double duty, but if you've been doing that for so long, I mean, it's just you're doing all that. But I mean, admittedly, there aren't a lot of people that do that, though, right? Like, who would you?
I think you have to
be tour manager and front of house.
I think in this day and age where budgets are pretty thin, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot if you're not willing to do that. I mean, there are definitely some guys who've been and I say guys as a generality.
Right. Because it's not like, even, not to interrupt you either, but I mean, it's a pretty healthy, for front of house tour managers, it's a pretty, I could be wrong, but I feel like it's a healthy mix of women and men in that business, right?
Yeah, definitely. I've got a core group of lady touring crew that fucking rock. But I think that anyone who's too stubborn to be willing to do the job, that is asked of you, you're basically just shooting yourself in the foot. Sorry, I forgot where I was.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I mean, I just even just for a few more minutes, 'cause I know you even have to go get to your show too. Yeah. So when's load-in for you?
I gotta be there at 4:30.
All right, so pretty much straight from here, right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I mean, obviously I feel like when you're doing this job, like you're really you're working tour to tour, like, do you already have like the rest of your year is like already wrapped up? Do you have stuff in 2017 already confirmed?
Not yet. The way work comes to me specifically is generally maybe 3 months out.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So I would say late November, people are going to start asking me for my availability for 2017.
Do you pick up jobs in Austin? Do you work in clubs just when you're like home?
It's really hard because there are so many engineers that live in Austin.
Right.
That the times that I'm home, which is, maybe a month or two in the summer and, maybe a month or two in the winter, everybody's home. And also those are times that not a lot of things are going on.
Right.
So finding work is a little rough. I did work the first weekend of ACL for a production company out there.
Mm-hmm.
So
I mean, at this point in time too, you've probably done every festival in the U.S. as well, right?
Almost. I still have not done Coachella.
Really?
Yes.
That's surprising.
No.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's all it's all contingent on the booking agent of that artist, and if they're on those things, then you're gonna do them. I mean,
was supposed to work for Melody's Echo Chamber. The first year she was booked for Coachella, but unfortunately her visa hadn't been approved. So she had to cancel all of her U.S. dates. But that was going to be my chance. That was my shot.
Dang. I have a feeling that'll probably come back around somewhere.
Definitely.
What's like, I wanted just a couple of these, like, so, barring, Coachella withstanding, like, as far as like a large festival space, as far as working front of house, like what do you think, what's your favorable one or the one that you enjoyed as far as, knowing that they're all kind of similar, in many ways, but there's some anomalies here and there too. Like which one do you like doing or did you enjoy?
I really like Sasquatch. Just that's also close to home.
Yeah.
For me.
It's beautiful too.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
That's in the Gorge in Washington State, which most people, I think, by now it's quite. I mean, it's a huge festival.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, that one is definitely my favorite. I don't know. I mean,
have you done all the rooms in? Sorry, have you done all? Just that came to my mind just talking about Sasquatch too, knowing that. How you started in Seattle at Graceland, like, and that you've toured so much. Now it's, I'm sure you've done, every size room too. How has it been going back to Seattle too, where you, grew up basically, and you've probably done all the way. What's the Neptune isn't the biggest room, but it's close. It's a big one, right?
Yeah.
What's your?
The Moore might be bigger.
Right. So you've done all those?
Yeah.
Cool.
I haven't done Paramount, which would be, I guess, the next size up. And before, I think that one would be before, like, the Key Arena or anything like that.
Yeah.
I haven't done any, like, I haven't been on a tour that has done any, like, arenas. Maybe a festival at an arena.
Right.
But, yeah.
Interesting. I mean, that seems like it would be almost, like, just super stressful to do. Like, do you have a desire to do that, or it's just, like, to do... Is it even a challenge to do sound in a place like an arena?
Yeah, because it's an acoustical nightmare.
Right.
Yeah.
So do you prefer like the smaller 500, 400 cap rooms? Like, does that feel the most comfortable?
I would say I'm most at home in a van and trailer like tour.
Hell yeah.
Rather than a bus. But the thing that I miss out on is like working with a crew. Maybe in a van and trailer you just have like a merch person with you. And that's cool, but like you can't really talk shop with the merch person.
Have you brought a monitor people with you?
Yeah, I've toured with crews. I mean, I guess I have done van and trailer tours with with like LDs and other crew members. And those are great. But I kind of miss working on crews. Yeah.
I remember the LDs from the Knitting Factory too, because they sat right next to the front of house. Are you able to bring anyone from that? Does anyone go out with you from back then? Like anyone that you've worked with like for a long time, like that's your go-to as far as your team?
My pool of LDs is pretty small, but I do reach out to some of the people that I enjoyed working with from the knit, but they're always booked too.
Right. Yeah. Everyone now seems to have found their path one way or another. Right.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, I won't keep you any longer. I really appreciate you doing this, and I love it. I've never successfully been able to book you for a tour, but I've definitely asked a couple times, and it's real work. It's like. I think the average concert goer doesn't really even register like that when it's like a touring headline act that plays in rooms, whether they're like a Bowery Ballroom size room or much bigger or even smaller. There's someone, and it's usually one person that's doing sound, settling up with the night manager of the venue that night and dealing with the artists and all their idiosyncrasies, and then getting back behind the wheel and driving to wherever the next place is or wherever they're crashing and stuff. And I think it's a pretty awesome, very commendable job. So I appreciate it. You're the first person that does that I've talked to too. Yeah. So thanks for that too. Yeah, cool. Yeah. Yes. Well, that was my conversation with Melanie Renecker on the House List. I want to thank her for taking the time to come by and do the chat while she was on tour. And I want to thank you guys for taking a few minutes of your week and listening to another great episode of the TheHouseListPodcast, produced and hosted by me, Peter Agoston, edited and engineered by my man CJ Stewart out in Humboldt County, California. Opening theme music produced by Dame Funky Keith Ede. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes. Just search the House List Podcast. It's right there. I please urge you in great earnesty to just hit that subscribe button, leave a comment, and spread the word. If you like to hear it on another platform, you let me know. It's also available on SoundCloud. You can go / the House List Podcast. If you want to hit me up, if you have any feedback or thoughts, just write me an email at thehouselistpodcast@gmail.com. All right, so that's another episode. I'll see you guys next week. Have a great start of your December, and let's try to make the most of this last month of this crazy, brutal, heavy year that we've all endured. So until then, take care, y'all. See you soon.